She lived a life that most people barely noticed. Every morning, she followed the same routine. Wake up early, get ready quietly, leave the house without making noise, and go to work. She was never late, never loud, and never the center of attention. To the people around her, she was just another face in the crowd. Someone you see every day but never really look at. At work, she kept to herself. She did her job well, but not in a way that stood out. She helped when asked, listened more than she spoke, and smiled politely when spoken to. People often described her as calm or shy. Some thought she lacked confidence. Others assumed she had no big dreams. No one imagined she carried something special inside her. During breaks, co-workers talked about their lives. They shared stories about weekend plans, family problems, and hobbies. Some talked proudly about sports, art, or skills they were learning. She usually listened quietly, nodding along. If someone asked her what she liked to do, she would give a simple answer. Nothing much, she would say, or just normal things, and that was enough to end the conversation. She never tried to impress anyone. She never talked about the past. She never hinted at anything unusual about herself. That was how she liked it. Blending in felt safer than standing out. One afternoon, everything almost changed, but not quite. It started as a light moment. A few people were joking around, laughing about talents they wished they had. Someone said they always wanted to sing but couldn't. Another said they dreamed of playing an instrument but never learned. The mood was relaxed, filled with harmless laughter. Then, without thinking too much, she made a small comment. Her voice was soft, almost playful. She said something like, "I used to play the piano." The room reacted instantly. Someone laughed, thinking she was joking. Another raised an eyebrow with a smile. A few exchanged glances, clearly amused. The idea seemed funny to them. Piano players, in their minds, were confident, expressive, and bold. Not someone quiet like her. "Oh, really?" someone said, laughing. "I can totally imagine that." She felt her face warm slightly. She smiled, unsure what to say next. She hadn't meant it seriously. It slipped out without planning. When she saw their reactions, she quickly added, "Just a little. Long time ago." That only made them laugh more. The moment passed quickly. The jokes moved on. Someone changed the topic. Within minutes, it was as if her words had never been spoken. But inside her something stirred. She didn't feel angry. She wasn't offended. She was used to being underestimated. Still, that brief moment stayed with her longer than she expected. As she returned to her work, her hands moved automatically, but her mind drifted. Memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit slowly surfaced. She remembered a small room from years ago, a place that smelled of old wood and dust. In one corner stood a piano that had seen better days. Some keys were worn. A few made strange sounds. But to her it was beautiful. She remembered sitting there as a child, feet barely touching the floor. No teacher, no lessons, just curiosity and patience. She pressed one key, then another, listening carefully. Slowly, she learned how sounds fit together. She practiced quietly, afraid of disturbing anyone. Night after night, she returned to that piano, teaching herself without realizing she was building something rare. But life didn't allow her to stay there forever. Responsibilities came early. Family needs grew heavier. Time became a luxury she could no longer afford. The piano stayed behind, and with it, a part of her heart. She promised herself she would return to it someday, but someday kept getting pushed further away. Years passed. She grew older, more careful, more silent. Music became something she carried inside instead of something she shared. She learned to lock it away, convincing herself it didn't matter anymore. Back in the present, the sound of voices pulled her back. Someone nearby was laughing loudly. Another person tapped their fingers on a desk, creating an uneven rhythm. Without realizing it, she noticed the pattern, the timing, the pauses. Music never truly left her. It lived quietly in the way she listened to the world. By the end of the day, the earlier joke had been forgotten by everyone else. For them, it was nothing more than a passing laugh. For her, it reopened a door she had kept closed for years. On her way home, she walked slower than usual. The city noise surrounded her, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were heavy, not sad, just full. She wondered when she had decided that hiding was easier than being seen. She reached her home as the sky began to darken. Inside, everything was simple and familiar. No decorations that drew attention. No signs of anything special. She made herself a light meal and sat quietly, staring at nothing in particular. Her fingers moved absent-mindedly on the table, tapping out a melody she hadn't played in years. The tune was soft, almost forgotten, but still there. She stopped suddenly, realizing what she was doing. A small smile appeared on her face, mixed with something else she couldn't quite name. That night, she lay awake longer than usual. The laughter from earlier replayed in her mind, not as an insult, but as a reminder. People didn't laugh because they were cruel. They laughed because they didn't know her, and she had made sure of that. She didn't decide anything that night. She didn't plan to prove anyone wrong. She simply allowed herself to remember who she once was. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought began to form. Not loud enough to be a promise, but strong enough to matter. Maybe hiding forever wasn't the answer. And maybe, just maybe, the joke they laughed at wasn't a joke at all. The next few days passed quietly, but something inside her had shifted. From the outside, nothing looked different. She still woke up early, still went to work, still spoke softly and kept her head down. But inside her mind, old memories kept returning without warning. Small sounds triggered them. The hum of traffic reminded her of long notes held gently. The ticking of a clock felt like a steady beat. Even the way doors closed or footsteps echoed in hallways carried rhythm. Music seemed to be everywhere again, whether she wanted it or not. She tried to ignore it at first. She told herself it was just nostalgia. Nothing more. Everyone remembers old hobbies from time to time. That didn't mean anything had to change. But at night, when the world grew quiet, it became harder to push those thoughts away. She would sit alone after dinner, the lights dim, her phone untouched. Her fingers moved on their own, tracing invisible keys on her lap or the edge of the table. She didn't even notice she was doing it until she stopped herself. Her mind drifted back to her younger years, to a time when life felt uncertain but hopeful. Back then, the piano was not a dream. It was a companion. The piano had not been new or fancy. It belonged to someone else, passed down and nearly forgotten. Some keys were chipped. A few stuck when pressed too hard. But none of that mattered. What mattered was how it sounded when the room was silent. She learned by listening. She watched how sounds changed when she pressed keys softly or firmly. She repeated simple melodies again and again until they stayed in her hands. There were no lessons, no praise, and no audience. Just patience. She never thought of it as talent. To her, it was simply something that felt natural. But as time went on, life asked more of her. There were days when she wanted to practice but couldn't. Chores needed to be done. Problems needed solving. Adults spoke in worried voices, and she learned early how to stay quiet and helpful. Slowly, the time she spent at the piano became less and less. Eventually, the day came when she pressed the keys for the last time. She didn't know it then. There was no goodbye, no final song. Life simply moved forward and didn't look back. Years later, sitting in her small home, she wondered when exactly she had decided that part of her life was over. At work, she noticed small changes in herself. She listened more closely when others spoke. She caught patterns in conversations, the rise and fall of voices. When someone laughed, she heard the tone behind it. When someone sighed, she felt the weight of it. Once, during a short break, someone nearby played music on their phone. It was nothing special, just a popular song. Still, it caught her attention. She listened carefully, noticing the chords beneath the words. Without meaning to, she began to imagine how it would sound on a piano. She quickly shook the thought away. This wasn't her world anymore, she reminded herself. Yet, something strange happened. She felt a quiet ache, not painful, but deep. It was the feeling of something unfinished. That weekend, She visited a place she hadn't been to in years. It wasn't planned. She simply found herself walking in that direction, almost without realizing it. The building looked smaller than she remembered. The walls were worn, the paint faded. But as soon as she stepped inside, the familiar smell returned. Dust and wood mixed with time. Her heart beat faster. In the corner, covered with a thin cloth, stood the piano. For a moment, she just stared at it. She didn't touch it. She didn't move closer. Seeing it again felt like meeting an old friend after many years. Unsure of what to say, she finally lifted the cloth slowly. The piano looked older now. Some keys were yellowed. Others bore marks of age. But it was still there, waiting. She sat down carefully, as if afraid the moment might break. Her hands hovered above the keys. She felt nervous in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. What if she had forgotten everything? She pressed one key. The sound filled the room, simple and clear. Her breath caught slightly. She pressed another, then another. Slowly, a familiar pattern returned. Her fingers hesitated at first, but then moved with growing confidence. She didn't play anything complex, just a soft melody she remembered from long ago. The notes were not perfect. Her timing was slightly off, but the feeling was there. Before she realized it, tears blurred her vision. She wasn't sad. She was relieved. The music reminded her that this part of her had never truly disappeared. It had only been waiting. She played for a few minutes, then stopped. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them in her lap. She didn't want to rush it. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about remembering. When she left the building, the world felt different. Lighter somehow. Over the next few days, she returned again and again. Sometimes she played for only a short while. Sometimes longer. Each time, her fingers grew steadier. The music flowed more easily. Still, she told no one. At work, she remained the same quiet person everyone thought they knew. When people joked or talked loudly, she smiled politely. No one suspected she was spending her free moments reconnecting with a forgotten part of herself. But inside her, confidence slowly began to grow. Not the loud kind that demands attention, but a calm, steady kind. She started to wonder what would happen if people really saw her. The thought scared her. Yet it also felt honest. She didn't plan to surprise anyone. She didn't imagine applause or praise. All she knew was that the music was no longer something she could lock away. The joke from before echoed faintly in her mind. They thought she was joking. This time she knew the truth. And soon, whether she was ready or not, others would too. The change inside her did not go unnoticed by herself. But to everyone else, she still looked the same. She walked the same way, spoke the same way, and kept the same quiet habits. Yet something had settled in her chest, steady and warm, like a secret that was no longer heavy. Each time she sat at the piano in that old building, her confidence grew a little more. Her fingers remembered patterns faster now. The pauses between notes felt natural again. She was not chasing perfection. She was simply letting the music breathe. Still, she never told anyone. At work, life continued as usual. Conversations floated around her, full of noise and laughter. People complained about small things, shared jokes, and teased each other lightly. She listened, smiled, and stayed in the background. One afternoon, someone mentioned an upcoming gathering. It was nothing formal, just a casual event where people would relax after a long week. Food, light music, and conversation. Someone joked that they should find live entertainment instead of playing songs from a phone. That comment lingered in the air. Someone laughed and said, "Didn't you say once that you could play the piano?" The room turned toward her. She froze for a brief moment. The memory of that earlier joke returned sharply. She felt the familiar heat rise to her face. A few people smiled, already amused. Others looked curious but doubtful. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I said I used to," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her heart beat faster. "Oh, come on," someone said playfully. "You can't just drop that and not prove it." Laughter followed. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the sound of people expecting a joke to continue. She smiled lightly, trying to brush it off. It was a long time ago, she said. I'm probably not any good now. That only made the teasing stronger. Everyone says that. Another voice added. Either you can play or you can't. The conversation moved on, but the seed had been planted. Later that day, she sat alone during a break, staring at nothing. Her hands rested quietly in her lap, but inside her, thoughts raced. Part of her wanted to disappear, to return to being invisible. Another part, quieter but stronger, asked a simple question. Why not? She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't want attention, but she was tired of shrinking herself before anyone even asked her to. That evening, as she walked home, she thought about the gathering, about the laughter, about the piano she had been playing in secret. Fear wrapped around her chest, but beneath it was something else. Calm certainty. She realized that the worst thing that could happen was not embarrassment. It was regret. The day of the gathering arrived faster than she expected. The space was warm and full of chatter. People stood in small groups, holding plates and cups, talking over one another. Soft music played in the background, barely noticed. In one corner of the room stood a piano. It was clean, well-kept, and clearly meant to be used, though no one had touched it yet. Her eyes were drawn to it immediately. She felt her stomach tighten. Someone noticed her looking and laughed. There it is, they said. Your moment. More laughter followed. A few people clapped jokingly. Others shook their heads, smiling as if watching a harmless performance about to go wrong. She stood still, unsure if she should move. You don't have to, someone said, still smiling. We're just teasing. She nodded, grateful for the chance to step back. But then she looked at the piano again, at the smooth surface, at the keys waiting quietly. She took a breath. I'll try, she said. The room fell slightly quieter, not silent, but attentive. Surprise flickered across a few faces. Someone raised their eyebrows. Another leaned forward with interest. She walked toward the piano slowly, feeling every step. Her hands felt cool. Her mouth was dry. She sat down. For a moment, she did nothing. The silence stretched just enough to feel uncomfortable. Someone cleared their throat. Another shifted in their seat. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't start with anything dramatic. She chose something simple, familiar. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. A few people exchanged looks, clearly expecting it to stop there. But it didn't. Her fingers moved with growing confidence. The melody unfolded naturally, steady and warm. The sound filled the room, gentle but clear. Conversations stopped. Laughter faded. One by one, people turned fully toward her. She forgot about them. She forgot about the room, the lights, the expectations. There was only the piano and the music flowing through her hands. Each note felt honest. Each pause felt right. The piece grew richer, deeper. Not loud, not flashy, but full of feeling. The kind of music that asks people to listen, not watch. When she finally reached the last note, she let it linger. The room was completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. She lifted her hands slowly and rested them in her lap. Her heart pounded. She stared at the keys, afraid to look up. Then someone breathed out softly. Another person whispered, I had no idea. Applause did not come immediately. Instead, there was a pause filled with something heavier than noise. Shock. Respect. Realization. Finally, clapping began. Not loud or wild, but genuine. People stood. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled in a way that said they were seeing her for the first time. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. Her face felt warm. But this time, it wasn't from embarrassment. She had not proven anything. She had simply told the truth the only way she knew how. As the noise returned to the room, she stepped away from the piano. People approached her, speaking softly now, carefully. I didn't know you could do that, someone said. She smiled gently. Neither did you, she replied. Inside her, something settled into place. The joke was over, and nothing would be the same again. The room slowly returned to life, but it did not feel the same as before. Voices were softer now. Laughter sounded careful, almost unsure. People moved closer to her, not to tease, but to understand. She felt it in the way they looked at her, as if a curtain had been pulled back and they were seeing something new. She tried to act normal. She smiled, thanked a few people, and stepped aside to give herself space. Inside, her chest still felt tight, not from fear, but from everything she had just let out. Playing in front of others had taken more from her than she expected. Someone offered her a drink. Someone else asked how long she had been playing. The questions came gently, without pressure. She answered simply, "A long time ago, on and off, mostly by myself." She didn't share details. She didn't explain the late nights or the years of silence. She wasn't ready for that. As the evening went on, she noticed how people treated her differently. Not dramatically, not in a way that felt fake, but with a quiet respect. The jokes were gone. No one laughed when she spoke. They listened. That change made her uncomfortable. She had spent so long being unseen that being seen felt strange. She kept reminding herself that nothing about her had actually changed. She was still the same person she had been that morning. When she finally left, the night air felt cool and steady. She walked home slowly, replaying the music in her mind. Each note returned clearly, like it had left a mark. At home, she sat down and let out a long breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she rested them on her knees. The silence around her felt heavy, but not empty. She slept deeply that night. The next day at work, the shift was clear. People greeted her differently. Some smiled wider than before. Others nodded with a look that said they were still surprised. A few avoided the topic completely, unsure of what to say. One person stopped her in the hallway. "I've been thinking about last night," they said. "You really surprised everyone." She nodded. "I surprised myself too," she replied. The words felt honest. As the days passed, small moments followed her. Someone asked her opinion on music playing in the background. Someone else mentioned a piano they had seen somewhere and asked if she had ever played anything like it. These were not big conversations, but they mattered. She began to speak a little more. Not louder, not bolder, just more present. She stopped shrinking her thoughts before sharing them. Still, she struggled with doubt. At night, alone, she wondered if that moment had been a mistake. What if people now expected something from her? What if they wanted her to perform again? The idea made her uneasy. Music had always been personal, quiet, safe. She returned to the old building and played alone whenever she could. There, she felt balanced again. The piano listened without judging. It didn't ask questions or expect anything. It simply responded. One evening, as she played, someone stood quietly nearby. She hadn't noticed them at first. When she finally looked up, she froze. "I didn't mean to interrupt," the person said quickly. "I heard the music and stopped." She hesitated, then nodded. "It's okay." They listened for a while, saying nothing. When she finished, they smiled, not wide or loud, but warm. "You play with feeling," they said. "That's rare." She didn't know how to respond. Praise still felt unfamiliar. She simply thanked them and packed up. As she walked home later, she thought about those words. Not as a compliment, but as a truth. Music was not about showing skill. It was about feeling. The more she allowed herself to accept that, the lighter she felt. Days turned into weeks. The shock faded, but the respect remained. People no longer joked about her comment. The story of that night became something shared quietly, often ending with the same words. "I never saw that coming." She learned to live with that. She did not become famous. Her life did not change overnight. She still worked the same job. She still lived in the same place. But inside, something was steady now. She no longer felt the need to hide. One afternoon, she passed by the piano at work. It stood there quietly, just like before. This time, she didn't feel nervous. She felt calm. She pressed one key softly. The sound echoed gently through the space. A few people looked up. She smiled at them, then moved on. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. The biggest change was not how others saw her, but how she saw herself. She stopped thinking of her past as something unfinished. It was part of her, and it always had been. Late one evening, sitting alone, she thought back to the laughter from weeks ago. It no longer hurt, felt distant, almost harmless. They had laughed because they didn't know. She had stayed silent because she was afraid. Now both of those things had changed. She didn't know what would come next. Maybe nothing. Maybe something small. Maybe something unexpected. But whatever it was, she knew one thing. She would no longer hide the truth about who she was. And that quiet decision mattered more than any applause ever could. Life did not suddenly become exciting or loud after that night. There were no big announcements or dramatic changes. Days continued to pass, one after another, calm and ordinary. But for her, those days felt different. They felt honest. She no longer carried that quiet tension in her chest. The feeling that she was hiding something important slowly faded. She walked a little straighter. She breathed a little deeper. It was not confidence that demanded attention. It was peace. At work, people treated her like they always had, but with something extra. A softness. A respect that did not need words. Some still brought up the piano from time to time, usually with a smile. "You should play again sometime," someone said once. She smiled back. "Maybe," she replied, and she meant it. She continued visiting the old building whenever she could. The piano there had become familiar again, like a place where she could think clearly. Some days she played longer pieces. Other days she played only a few notes and stopped. Both felt right. Music was no longer something she was afraid to lose. It was something she trusted. One quiet afternoon, she noticed someone sitting nearby while she played. This time she didn't stop. She finished the piece, letting the last note fade naturally. "That sounded peaceful," the person said. She nodded. "It feels that way too." There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people sharing a moment. That was enough. Over time, she realized something important. She had spent years thinking her talent only mattered if others noticed it. Now she understood that it mattered because it was part of her, whether anyone listened or not. That thought stayed with her. One evening, as she walked home, she passed by a small place where music drifted out into the street. Someone was struggling through a song on a piano, missing notes, starting again. People nearby barely paid attention. She paused for a moment, listening. She smiled. Not because it was good, but because it was brave. At home, she sat by the window and watched the lights outside. She thought about her younger self, sitting alone at a worn piano, learning one note at a time. She wished she could tell that child one thing. "You won't lose this. You'll just carry it quietly for a while." The thought filled her with warmth. Weeks later, another gathering took place. Smaller than the last one. More relaxed. This time no one teased her. No one joked. The piano stood in the corner again. She felt no fear. Without being asked, she walked over and sat down. Conversations slowly faded as people noticed. She didn't rush. She didn't feel the need to impress. She played something simple, honest, the kind of music that feels like a deep breath. When she finished, people smiled. Some clapped softly. Others just sat quietly, letting the moment pass. She stood up, feeling calm. That was when she understood the full truth. The shock from before was never about the piano. It was about expectations. People had expected very little from her because she had taught them to. She had hidden to stay safe, not realizing she was also hiding her own voice. Now, she no longer needed to correct anyone. She simply lived. Her life stayed simple. She did not chase stages or attention. She played when she wanted. She stayed quiet when she needed. She allowed herself to be fully present, both in silence and in sound. Sometimes people still said, "I can't believe you never told us." She answered honestly, "I didn't think it mattered. And maybe back then it hadn't. But now it did. Because she mattered." One night, sitting alone again, she placed her hands on an invisible piano, just like before. This time, she didn't stop herself. She let her fingers move freely, smiling as the familiar rhythm returned. She wasn't hiding anymore. The world had not changed, but she had, and that quiet change made all the difference.